it relational or is it NoSQL based?
So right now it's NoSQL. So we why'd you ask this question? That's an emerging space in terms of if you're going to put your data in a NoSQL database, bolting on Pentaho or something like that is they claim they can do it, but I haven't seen it. So we rolled our own, and we exposed an API to allow people now to suck that data into a relational star schema so they can bolt on, one of these tools. I think that's something we may see soon in terms of some innovation there, but that's the short answer.
Personally, I'm relying on the cloud vendors to provide basic analytics. Sometimes to start with, you can get some basic statistics that will help guide you, like, do I need to collect more information? Maybe you don't. Maybe you can just rely on the last 30-day activity graph for whatever service it is that you care about that the provider is giving you. And Amazon has a bunch of those charts. Google App Engine has a bunch of those charts. It's really when you want to get the specifics about your app's data that it becomes important. And at small scales, it doesn't really matter what you use. You can come up with the custom programs that'll stick it into a MySQL database or slap it into Mongo and run some queries and get it done. It's when you get to the really large quantities of data where you have multiple gigabytes being collected per day, or you need to deal with terabytes of data, that these problems get really challenging. And then you need to apply a whole different set of skills and tools to it. You might need to get into Hadoop. You might need to get into Hive and Pig, and you might need to employ somebody like Vertica, who has these column store databases instead of using traditional SQL solutions. There are a lot of different ways to slice it. It really just depends on what your problem is. But you should be so lucky to have a problem like that.
In the back?
I'm a big fan of Google. And recently, they've started this trend of deprecating a lot of their free APIs that everyone used in the past, especially mobile app development.
Like Wave and whatnot?
And the translation engine and voice recognition engine. So would you suggest to everyone not to throw all the eggs in one basket? Because I constantly hear you say Google App Engine. I know that's one of their major initiatives, and they're probably not going to start charging for that or limit the transactions or apply other limitations to it. But wouldn't you suggest not, although Google is a large company, not to put all the eggs in one basket with a large company like that? There are pros and cons to go with an open source platform or a large company like Google, but what's a good compromise? Shouldn't you leverage multiple technologies in most cases, instead of using just something like Google App Engine?
So I'll start. Is that right? So I think that's a kind of a risk-reward thing you need to ask yourself. So we bet on Heroku because they had been acquired by Salesforce, and we figured, okay, they're just not going to shut Heroku down. They shelled out a bunch of money. I don't think Google's going to shut down App Engine either. Now, they may change the strategy in terms of App Engine for business and whatnot, how they charge and whatnot. But you can sit back and say, okay, we're going to plan for this and code for this and not do this and that, or you're just going to say, I'm going to make an educated choice and sprint as fast as I can and take advantage of this. So I would say these platforms probably have a long life, but you may want to look closely at some of these libraries. One thing we did consciously with Heroku is we didn't make use of their delayed job API. That's why we chose SQS, in that we wanted to be able to, we didn't want to be tied to Heroku, not that we thought Heroku would go away, but we just didn't want to, we wanted the ability, should Heroku go down, we could deploy this somewhere else. And delayed job is somewhat, it is portable, but it ultimately is tied to Heroku somewhat. So Google is very good at deprecating this thing. So but and just like when I said we bet on open source, we wanted to bet on open source that had momentum, that wasn't going down. So MongoDB is not going anywhere. Hopefully, Sinatra seems like I had a big crowd around it. Rails is not going anywhere. Stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons I built this not just on Google App Engine in Python, but on Django on Python on Google App Engine, is so that I could port my app elsewhere if need be. Because I'm especially liking some of the changes that have happened to support Django and Python on Google App Engine lately, because the backend is now something called Django non-rel, which is the non-relational database port of Django. Django traditionally has relied on having a SQL database, a relational database as its backend, like MySQL. But with this, if I wanted to, I could use Mongo as a backend. I could just plug in the Mongo version of it, and I could run it on Heroku and just change the platform as a service configuration files, and I'd be good to go. So I very much was interested in that, and I think I've got a reasonable strategy for dealing with that. But I didn't start out that way. This was a nice side effect. I wanted to get it up and running as quickly as possible to start with, and I think that usually that's a better strategy. You have to understand what the risks are when dealing with that. Like SQS, is there an SQS compatible queuing service out there right now other than what Amazon is providing? I don't know, but I'll bet there will be within 6 months. The same way people like Eucalyptus wrote to the EC2 APIs, and now you have multiple service providers. If you use EC2 as your baseline, well, you could go to Rackspace. They provide an EC2 compatible VM API. You could do a lot of different things. You could run your own private cloud, and the same sort of thing is going to happen with the most popular APIs. So having some portability is valuable, but it might not be the most valuable thing for your app. It really depends on the level of effort and what your business concerns are in the long run.
Okay, let's have one more question. Anyone?
The best question's coming up, sir.
Near the front.
Have you found any reasons to mix the different types of databases, like NoSQL, relational, object-oriented? God, nobody uses object-oriented.
I've seen this in a couple different contexts. Like, I did some work for one consulting client who had a massive MySQL installation. But they also took their raw data and piped it into a set of log files that they ran through with Hadoop, and they were considering using a couple different non-relational techniques in a few places. These tools all have kind of sweet spots, and the most of the NoSQL databases have very good write performance. Okay, and if you can structure your data so that you can do these massive concurrent writes and get benefit from that, then that's a great solution. But it's really hard to query and join these in any reasonable fashion, at least with most of them.
Well, I was answering your question about analytics. If you're using a NoSQL database and you want to plug in something like Jasper or Cognos or something like that, you're most likely going to want to put it in a relational model. So, and that's something we constantly wrestle with. Do we need to move some of this data into a traditional relational database so that we can bolt on, a commercially or a tool that's very good at reporting? I think that's the only use case I can think of off the top of my head why we would want to have a mixed. You did mention joins and whatnot. I mean, here's a great solution or a great story. Before this, I worked at a large financial services company, and the end users were business analysts. But this was a huge data problem, and it made total sense to put this data into something like Mongo. But at the end of the day, those people couldn't get the data out of Mongo. I mean, I couldn't go to a business analyst and say, here's a JavaScript window, here's how you query. They already knew SQL, right? So we ultimately said, okay, fine, we have to put this in SQL. So I think it's a matter of the use cases of, if you go NoSQL, just be aware that getting the data out is going to be somewhat challenging unless you're a developer. You can't do joins in any of them that I know of.
Take a huge step backward to 1978.
But you get a whole lot out of it, right? I mean, out of the box, we got replication, sharding, massive concurrency on writes. I mean, you can do some of this stuff with MySQL, but it requires a DBA, and I'm not a DBA, nor is Chris.
And MySQL DBAs are hard to come by. They're expensive for the really good ones. It's very difficult to hire a MySQL DBA. Okay, very, very difficult to hire a MySQL DBA, especially one who can deal with multi-terabyte installations. Very, very hard. So I just wanted to say one last thing about Heroku. Mm-hmm. As I was getting ready to do the Facebook app launch, I noticed that Facebook, since their conference, has a new option where you can start a a Facebook app project on Heroku with one button click. Okay, so if that was there a year ago, I totally would have built some kind of Heroku-based app instead of going Google App Engine. Putting the big easy button on it, no. There are going to be a lot of people spinning up Heroku accounts and using that to build Facebook apps because of this. So.
And something that neither of us mentioned is that Heroku and App Engine are free to start with.
Yeah, that was my other concern, free. So I haven't paid a dime yet for any of the dev or hosting for this. And it goes HTTPS for free also, which was really nice. I don't know, does Heroku have an HTTPS free?
You can piggyback for free.
Yeah, so I'm piggybacking off of the AppSpot wildcard cert for this. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to our
Thank you.
presenters.